Back in March, I talked about Dream Theater's debut album, When Dream and Day Unite. And while that video helped me gain more appreciation for the record, I mostly stand by my original conclusion, that it was a somewhat rough, but still impressive launching pad for the legendary progressive metal outfit. And of course, it doesn't exactly help when the album's direct follow-up is one of the most widely celebrated metal albums of the 90s. Obviously, prog metal was already a thing before Images and Words, as proven by bands like Queensryche, Watchtower, Fate's Warning, etc. But Dream Theater's sophomore album represented a massive breakthrough for the genre, setting new standards for virtuosity, composition, and even commercial potential. But you know what? I will not be talking about Images and Words today, or at least not in depth. After all, what else is there to dissect when it comes to this album? Everyone and their brother has discussed this classic at great length, from the production to the songwriting to the performances to its impact. Its legacy is set in stone at this point. No need to reiterate what others have already said. So instead, I want to turn my focus to a different album in their discog, the swan song of keyboardist Kevin Moore, a brooding experience that fuses a dark atmosphere with heavy, down-tuned riffs, a record that pushes James LaBrie to his absolute limit vocally. This is Awake. If Images and Words is regarded as a stone-cold classic, then I would consider Awake a cult classic that became a classic. Nowadays, it's seen as one of Dream Theater's all-time best releases, but it was originally seen as somewhat of a disappointment when it first came out in 1994. Critical reception was mixed to positive, and the sales figures were significantly lower than those of its predecessor, eventually leading to a more commercial effort with 1997's Falling into Infinity. Don't worry, we'll get to that one sometime. East West, the band's label at the time, wasn't happy with Awake's overall performance, and tensions were starting to rise, both in and out of the group. And here's the thing, it wasn't for lack of trying, from either the band members or the label. Dream Theater were urged to make a darker, heavier record due to the alternative metal and groove metal trends going on at the time. And they were absolutely up to the challenge. Awake is their first album to employ 7-string guitars, and with this change comes a crunchier, grittier tone than the one found on prior outings. And it's pretty clear that the band, and guitarist John Petrucci in particular, were eager to take advantage of this directional shift, allowing their songs to revolve more around the riffs themselves. Caught in a Web, The Mirror, and Lie are all prime examples of this approach. When listening to tracks like these, you can see why they'd put out something like Train of Thought a decade later. But, with that said, don't think for a second that Dream Theater abandoned their penchant for atmosphere and melody in any way here. If anything, Awake is even more dense and multifaceted than their first few records. And much of that comes down to one man, Kevin Moore. As I alluded to earlier, this was his final project with Dream Theater, due to him and the other members growing apart creatively, as well as his desire to release his own music independent of the band. In fact, a few songs on Awake actually hint at Moore's impending departure from the group. Petrucci's lyrics on Innocence Faded reflect his and Moore's declining friendship, with him stating in the band's official biography, Lifting Shadows, there was a feeling of it not being the same way it had been, and the realization that things were not always going to remain the same. Moore's lyrics on 6 O'Clock are a bit more obtuse, but it's not hard to put two and two together. The whole song details a person trying to escape or overcome a difficult situation, which could easily be applied to his position in the band at the time. But on a musical level, damn, does he add so much color and life to these songs. While he's obviously gifted on a technical level, I mean, let's be honest, you kind of need to be if you're in Dream Theater. His biggest talent lies in how he complements the rest of the members creatively. Let's go back to that riff in the mirror, and play it a little longer this time. Just see what happens. Isn't it crazy how that little quasi-symphonic touch changes the entire mood of the song? What started out as simple aggro chugging has now become a cloudy, melancholic soundscape, setting the stage perfectly for the rest of the track. And that's the power of Moore, filling in the gaps that the other members can't. I know I'm putting a lot of emphasis on Moore right now, but that's because Awake really does feel like his record. That's obviously not to take away from the other members, and I'll certainly highlight each one in this video, but it's hard to properly convey just how strong Moore's influence is on this album. You really need to hear it to believe it. And with the exception of one very obvious song I'll talk about later on, I think the best example of his atmospheric approach is the slow, contemplative ballad Lifting Shadows Off a Dream. The way his keys emphasize the shifts between darkness and light, between major and minor. His contributions may seem subtle, but they make a world of difference. But yeah, let's get to the other members now. I've already hinted that Petrucci went for a heavier, more aggressive sound for Awake, and Mike Portnoy, John Myung, and especially James LaBrie did their best to match that energy. LaBrie still showcases plenty of the same catchy, melodic traits he exhibited on Images and Words, but now with much more grit and raspiness in his voice. Songs like Caught in a Web, Voices, and Lie simply would not be the same without that added intensity. Or just check out the chorus of 6 O'Clock. Yeah, that's good stuff. Unfortunately, LaBrie's vocals would deteriorate significantly over time, due to a combination of admittedly poor technique and a terrible food poisoning incident that happened in late 1994. But back in his prime, he was an absolute beast on the mic. But hey, what's a good frontman without a good rhythm section to support him? This might be a hot take, but I think Myung and Portnoy are even better on Awake than they were on Images and Words. For one thing, they both get a lot more time to shine on this one. Hell, when you start the album, Portnoy's drumming is the very first thing you hear. But my favorite moments between the two musicians are when the bass and drum parts work off each other in such a compelling way. Like the quiet, suspenseful intro of Scarred. The haunting outro of The Mirror, which I forgot to mention earlier is about Portnoy's battle with alcoholism. Or the introspective first verse of Innocence Faded. These moments of cool interplay can be found all throughout Awake, and they help give the record a unique atmosphere and overall character. And when all 5 members are at the peak of their powers like they are here, something like the A Mind Beside Itself trilogy can be allowed to emerge. This is the centerpiece of Awake, and is composed of, you guessed it, 3 songs. The first, Erotomania, is a dense, heady instrumental that blurs the line between technical prowess and emotional weight. Lots of rhythmic shifts, dynamic variety, and mood changes, just as you'd expect from a solid Dream Theater instrumental. Then there's Voices, a mini-epic that explores topics of religion, sex, and mental illness in a disturbing yet evocative way. Note the section in the middle, which includes a sample of rapper Primo reading an excerpt from Cultural Revolution. Sampling was a big staple of the band's early work, and this was one of the most effective uses of that approach. Finally, there's the calm acoustic ballad, The Silent Man, a lovely little tune that deals with familial communication breakdown. Not only does it serve as a nice breather after Voices, but also as a nice intermission before the final stretch of the album. All of this is enhanced by the production, mixing, and engineering of John Purdell and Dwayne Barron. It's no secret that Dream Theater and David Prater clashed a lot during the sessions of Images and Words, and while the production still turned out fine in the end, I would argue that it's the weakest aspect of that record. Awake, meanwhile, is a significant improvement on that front. The mix really caters to the shifting dynamics and moods, complementing the power and intensity of the heavy chugging riffs, while providing enough space for the soft, reflective moments to shine. Most importantly, Portnoy's snare drum sounds so much better here, and I'm glad that Awake sounds so good in general, because it shines a light on one of the band's most fascinating tracks. Yep, let's get to it. Space Dive Vest is Moore's big finale with Dream Theater, and it's safe to say that he ended his run on a wonderful note. Inspired by a fashion magazine, in which a model was, in fact, wearing what the magazine referred to as a space dive vest, the ballad spends its first half with a somber duet between Moore's keyboards and LaBrie's vocals. The song gradually builds in intensity with the help of some very well-placed samples, until the full band comes in and takes the track to an explosive, cathartic finish. I know I said earlier that Awake is Moore's album, but even if you don't believe that, I don't think you can dispute that Space Dive Vest is absolutely his song. It's to the point that the other band members didn't even want to play it for the longest time, so as not to ruin the magic. Eventually they did start playing it live again in 2014, in honor of Awake's 20th anniversary. But when a song is so good, and so strongly tied to one member, that even the other members don't want to mess with it, you know it's something special. In any case, Awake would be Moore's last record with the band. In fact, he didn't even join them for the tour supporting the album. He'd already announced at the end of the recording sessions that he would be departing. And even before then, he'd already shown subtle signs that he wouldn't be staying in Dream Theater for much longer. According to LaBrie in Lifting Shadows, when Mike, John Petrucci, and John Mayung were in the rehearsal studio putting together the music for Awake, he wasn't there as he had been in the past. And when he was there, the guys told me he would be sitting reading a magazine when they were trying to work out riffs. For the Awake tour, Moore was replaced by fellow keyboard virtuoso Derek Sherinian, who would eventually become his permanent replacement. For only about an album and an EP, that is. Then he got sacked, and Jordan Rudess became the permanent replacement. Yeah, Dream Theater's had quite the history when it comes to keyboardists, and drummers for that matter, but that's a story for another day. With all of that said, Awake is now widely regarded as one of the band's best records, and for damn good reason. Images and Words was always going to be a tough act to follow, but the group managed to pull out one hell of a follow-up. The lyrics got more contemplative, the riffs got heavier, the vocals got grittier, and yet the track list and pacing didn't suffer one bit. This is one 75-minute album that absolutely flies by, which is something I can't say for some of their later work. The songwriting and performances are just that compelling throughout. If you haven't listened to Awake yet for whatever reason, or if you have but haven't revisited it in a while, I highly recommend spinning it as soon as you can, especially if you're a prog fan. Chances are you're going to love the time you spend with this thoughtful, heavy, thoroughly impressive work of Dark Majesty. Hey everyone, as always, thanks for watching. It was nice to return to Dream Theater for another video, as they've been one of my favorite bands for about a decade and a half now. They were one of the groups that really got me into prog metal in general, alongside other acts like Opeth and Symphony X. If you enjoyed what you saw, please consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. And with that, thank you, and I will see you in the next one.
So you tell me, trust me, I can trust you. Just let me show